This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. Episode 178 from the Subway to Shea studios in my office. Make sure you're following Subway to Shea on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me personally on X at AntRivera86. And make sure to like this video. Make sure you're subscribing on YouTube. And if you like to listen to the audio version of the show, you can do that on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This is probably will be the last show of 2024, unless, a signing happens or so. We will come back. We will be on here live. But until then, this is most likely the last show of 2024, which was a great year for the New York Mets. The ups, the downs, all the mascots, Grimace, OMG. Talk about Rally Pimp. Talk about Seymour Wiener. All of the stuff that happened in 2024, from Lindor's heroics in the last game, the second to last game of the season to get the Mets to the playoffs. You talk about Pete Alonso's last-minute heroics to send the Mets to the NLCS. You could talk about the Lindor Grand Slam. You could talk about Mark Vientos' great year. All gets put into a box now for 2024, and we move on to 2025, which is hopefully the year of Juan Soto and the New York Mets trying to go back to the World Series and get a title for the first time since 1986. Shout out to everyone that's in the room right now. It's 54 of you to start off the show. Can't thank you enough. Appreciate you guys all here. Brad, Deron Rivera, who's got the comment right there. He knows the assignment. Like and subscribe to Subway to Shea. Make sure you're doing that. We are on the hunt, I guess, or are on the road, the path to 800 subscribers. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. Got Jeff Cohen in the room, Patty and NYC in here, my guy Carlos Ramos in here, Rosie K in the room, D in the room. So much going on today to talk about. And obviously it all starts off with Pete Alonso. Steven Steele finally here for the chat. Welcome aboard. Great to have you on. Carlos Ortiz as well. Make sure you hit up the comments. I'll try to get to as many as possible. This is a solo show today. No guests, just me, just you guys. So whatever comments, questions, hit it up in the chat. I'll do my best to get to it. It's a little harder, obviously, when you're doing a solo show to get everybody's comments in here, but I'll do my best. G-Money Stacks in the room. How you do, my friend? Great to have you here. Cindy McGrath. Good morning, Cindy. Armand is in here. A lot of good people in the chat, as always, every week, and I appreciate every single one of you. Let's get right into the show as well. Shout out to David Smith. He's also in the chat. Look, guys, Pete Alonso and the contract demands that he is requesting. That's what we're going to start off with. Now, I don't know 100% what he is looking for, right? The talk was possibly, close to 200 mil, right? Pete's not getting that. We know that. Pete's not getting 200 mil and the years from a team, considering what we've seen Christian Walker get, considering seeing trades for Nathaniel Lowe to the Nationals. You got Josh Naylor going to the Diamondbacks, Paul Goldschmidt getting his 1-year deal. And you look at the Christian Walker deal, and for me, for the Mets and for Pete Alonso, it's got to be at most, and this is the deal that I had on my head when I had Nick Durst on here from I'm Right podcast. I said probably 5 years, 125 mil would be, the max for me. The max AAV I would go far as is 27.5. I don't think the Mets need to go any further than that. Now you look at the tea leaves, right, that have been dropped. What we've been hearing in articles, and you can believe guys like Joel Sherman, you can believe guys like John Heyman, all, I don't know what to take from all this stuff, but we got to go by what they've been posting. And as of most recently, John Heyman of the New York Post said that there's no deal that's imminent. because there's a sizable gap in talks. Now, what does that mean number-wise? Now, like I said, take tea leaves with a grain of salt. Carlos Baerga, who for the most part has not been right on his predictions, but we got numbers from him. 3 years, 90 mil. Now, I think for the Mets, that's a pretty fair deal, right? I would assume that there would be opt-out after probably year one. This does work well for Pete Alonso because he'll have the highest average annual value at 30 mil. So is that the contract that the Mets are far apart on that John Heyman mentions? Joe Sherman, as we know, also New York Post, mentioned about a year ago that in, I think, the second half of 2023, Pete Alonso was offered 7 years, 158 mil contract extension to stay with the Mets that he declined. He's not getting anywhere close to that. Spot Track, they always put up the market value for each player, has Pete Alonso right now at 6 years, $174 million, a $29 million AAV. Now, if the Mets, at the most years I want to go with Pete Alonso, and you let me know if you guys agree with this, the most I'm willing to go, that's where I cut it off, is 5 years. And that 5th year is possibly an option year for me. I do like how Nick Durst, if you remember in the other episode, how he kind of stacked the deal around, I think it was 4 years, 100 mil, having a opt-out after the first year. If Pete Alonso has a great season this year and is able to opt out, that's all better to him, right? It works out for him. It works out for the Mets. Because not only do the Mets now not have to pay him because he opts out, but they have the opportunity, if he's available, to go after Vladimir Guerrero Jr. That's what's been talked about so much this offseason. Don't offer Pete a lot of money. Go get an alternative and go after Vladimir Guerrero Jr. in the offseason. That's still possibly in play. Now, we don't know the exact details of what Pete wants, but if it is $200 million, he's not getting that. I just don't think so. I don't think he would be getting all that money. David Smith saying, pissed off Mets fan, Mets overpaid for Juan Soto by $200 million, but are nickel and diming Pete Alonso, homegrown player, been on Mets 7 years, averaging 38 home runs, 98 RBIs, and a .250 batting average. I think it's because of the age. Juan Soto's only 26 years old. Pete Alonso's not old, right? I mean, for first baseman, he's around 30 years old. That's why I would give him a 5-year deal. There's no need to rush, I think, this deal with Pete Alonso. That's the only part I'm saying, is that there's no need to rush, because right now, the ball is in the Mets' court. The Mets have all the leverage right now. With Alex Bregman still being out there and the Mets still being linked to Alex Bregman, who knows how real it is, how much they really want him. But he gives the Mets leverage in any contract negotiations with Pete Alonso right now. And until he's not available anymore, the ball is still in the Mets' court. Remember what I said. The Mets had offered Pete Alonso 7 years, 158 mil. He is now not going to get that. He messed up. He messed up not taking the contract extension. He messed up going to Scott Boras. He messed up not having a career season that everyone thought he was going to have, including me. So now he's going to have to either take a lesser deal or he's going to have to take lesser years with a higher AAV. D saying there is no suitor for Alonso other than the Giants. Disagree? I think you're right now. The Giants, not only that the Giants may be the only other suitor, but the Giants have the money, right? They've been willing to pay a lot of players to come to San Francisco. Just no one wants to come. San Francisco right now, although a way better organization, more world championships, they're kind of like Toronto in the National League, right? They're the National League version of the Toronto Blue Jays because they have the money as well, but no players seem to want to go there at this moment in time. And that seems to be the problem in San Francisco. But they are right now probably the top suitor when it comes to being able to provide the money. Probably the years as well, right? They went after Aaron Judge. They lost on Aaron Judge. They went after Brandon Nimmo, lost on Brandon Nimmo. How many players have they gone after, even this year as well, that they have not been able to attain, sign? So I would put them in there as a team that the Mets have to, have their eyes open on and checking out. So he's put himself in a tough spot. Jeff Cohen saying 5 years, 125 is a very reasonable contract. He has to know he will be an all-time great Met. That's where I had the contract. I know David Smith is going to disagree, but that's just considering everything that has gone down right now. Right? I know the Mets overpaid for Juan Soto. I get it. We all know. They had no choice but to overpay for Juan Soto. That doesn't mean that they're out on Pete Alonso. They're very much in on Pete Alonso. They're very much in on Alex Bregman. And from what we can gather, and we'll get into this later on in the show, they're still in on outfield help after offering Teoscar Hernandez a contract. So it's not like the Juan Soto deal is going to hinder him, hinder Cohen or David Stearns from making these moves. D saying he thinks the Mets will pivot to Bregman. But he's also a Boras client, so who knows? But the Mets have worked with Boras clients, right? They signed Nimmo, they signed Scherzer, they've now signed Juan Soto. I think the days of worrying about what the Mets, if they will, be able to work with Scott Boras, I think those days are over. It's not the Wilpons anymore. We don't have the Madoff situation anymore. So I just don't see there being an issue working with Boras. Yeah, he's a pain, right? Look all the contracts he's looking forward for his players. He's got to do his job, but it's a pain working with him. But the Mets have most recently done a lot of business with Scott Boras, and I think that will continue. David Smith saying, how do the Mets replace Pete Alonso's production at first base? They can. It's a big mistake. They definitely can't now this year. That's for sure. Unless they trade for Vladimir Guerrero Jr., which I don't think is going to happen. But if he's available next year, it's a possibility, but it's a huge risk, right, David? It's a huge risk for the Mets to go out there and risk losing a guy who puts up more than 30 home runs a year, definitely close to 90 RBIs, close to 100 RBIs a year. It's definitely a big risk. They won't be able to replace it this year because I'm going to give you the only two options that I am willing to, have at first base if the Mets don't sign Pete Alonso. And I'm looking at the scenario that John Heyman put out there in his article when talking about Pete Alonso and his contract, the alternative fallback option. And he said, Mark Vientos at first base and then Beatty and Mauricio at third base. To me, I don't know if you agree with this. To me, unacceptable. There's no way that that's an acceptable alternative or an acceptable fallback to now move Vientos, who has played a decent a decent third base, and now have him move to another position to try again with Brett Beatty and have a injured Ronnie Mauricio, who's probably going to be rehabbing for the first half of the 2025 season, that be the alternative. I don't want to have to say this, but the Mets are kind of in win now mode now that they have signed Juan Soto. When you go to within 2 games of the NLCS, whether it be luck or not, right? They got there and they got to within 2 games of the World Series. I'm sorry. But when you get there, whether luck or not, how well they played or not, and then you go on to sign the top free agent in baseball, you are in win now mode. You just are. If they don't sign Pete Alonso, I am only, and I'm saying this, only moving Mark Vientos to first base if they sign Alex Bregman. Outside of that, I'm sorry. I think that that's a big mistake. I think the Mets need to keep Vientos at third. And here are the other 2 options, fallback options that I only believe. They signed Joey Meneses to be a first baseman, right? He didn't play that much last year, 76 games in 2024, 3 homers, 42 RBIs, had a 231 batting average and a 593 OPS. I'm not counting on him. He's a depth backup piece if needed off the bench for the Mets. He cannot be playing first base on an everyday basis. The only 2 other guys that I would be interested in signing, and this is a 1-year stopgap so that the Mets can pursue Vladimir Guerrero if he's available in free agency. That is Justin Turner. And man, Justin Turner is now 40 years old. Last season batted .259, had 11 homers, 55 RBIs, and a 737 OPS. He's 40, but you're only giving him 1 year. I don't know if he breaks down like JD Martinez. It's quite possible. But we're talking about a 1-year stopgap to try to get the Mets through. He's got playoff experience. We all know this. The only other guy that I would give a 1-year deal to is Josh Bell. 32 years old, 249 batting average, 19 homers, 71 RBIs, 725 OPS. He would be the one I would go after. But because he's 32, he might be looking for more. Guys, let me know what your thoughts are, because this is a real serious issue that's going to be happening if the Mets do not sign Pete Alonso. I think they still will. He's still intact on my wish list now that we've gotten Minaya and Soto. But you also have to prepare for the Mets not having Pete Alonso. And it was a lot different a couple of weeks ago when there were more available options out there. Now there's not. Goldschmidt's gone. Walker's gone. Naylor's been traded. Lowe's been traded. Carlos Santana signed with the Cleveland Guardians. So he's not available. All the other options, I think, are not good at all. Outside of Justin Turner and Josh Bell, I think that's the only 2 that I'm willing to take a chance on. This team's strategy has changed. Like I said, they are in win now mode. They need to act like it. And currently, with Alex Bregman still around, the Mets have all the leverage right now when it comes to Pete Alonso and the contract. Let's go to some of you guys in the chat right now. Adele Chapman, diehard Mets fans are loyal. Good morning to everyone. Good morning to you as well. Rosie K saying, I can't believe that Boris still wants 200. Yeah. And considering what we've seen everyone else get, you would think that maybe they would bring their numbers down. But the fact that there aren't that many teams now that need first baseman. It was brought up about the Giants. That's one of them. Obviously, the Mets. But Pete's kind of falling into the Mets' lap, right? He can, first off, the Mets need a first baseman. Steve Cohen can offer the most money possible and beat out any other team when it comes to upping a bid. So it just makes sense. Does Pete want to go to San Francisco where, to me, I think his power numbers are going to diminish because that is a pitcher's ballpark if I've ever seen one. That's why JD Martinez didn't go there. Although he wasn't great for us, but I think he would have been a lot worse in San Francisco. That's for sure. Jeff Cohen saying, doesn't an opt-out after 1 year just putting pressure on Alonso to perform just like last season? It is. It does put pressure on him. But now he has an opportunity to turn the table and get his stock back up. He gained a little bit of it back in the postseason. And who knows, maybe the fact that Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is also a free agent, maybe that'll help him get a little bit more money. Because obviously, Vladimir Guerrero, what did he turn down? $400 million from Toronto or something like that? He's going to be asking for a lot more than Pete is. JB saying 3 for $90 million was a great offer for Pete. Just go to 150 and sign him or move on. He won't get more than 150. I still think he gets less than around 125. I'm sorry. But I wouldn't be shocked if he gets to 150. I just don't see the Mets just moving on yet because they have the leverage. So they can wait this out if they wanted to. Right? The fallback option is putting Mark Vientos at first base. That's the real fall, because I don't know what the interest is, if there is any, in Justin Turner or Josh Bell. But the real fallback option is putting Mark Vientos at first base. Things will take a different turn, obviously, and get moved along a little faster if Alex Bregman signs somewhere. Patty's saying, good for the Mets, but I have no idea if 390 is good for Pete. Obviously, the years are not. But the average annual value will have him as the highest paid first baseman, at least of this class of first basemen. I don't know off the top of my head what Freddie Freeman's getting and what Matt Olson's getting, but at least of these first basemen in free agency, he'll be getting a lot more than Christian Walker on a yearly basis. Carlos Ramos saying signing Alonso long-term would hurt us and it would become a problem we need to avoid. You're right, D. I believe Clifford has a lot to do in this. And maybe he does. Maybe Ryan Clifford, they are really like his stuff. It's hard for me to get on the bandwagon of prospects when you got a guy that hits 30 to 40 home runs a year. To now require Clifford and expect Clifford to have the same type of production right off the bat like Pete has had, I think is asking a lot from the kid. And now you're expecting as well Mark Vientos to step up and not have a sophomore slump and produce the way that he produced. And you're also expecting a guy like Francisco Alvarez to come back from his injury and live up to his expectations, because he was also sought at as a power guy. Remember all of the comps to Mike Piazza? I never like to do that. But yeah, you're asking these two kids already to be the power bat in the lineup. And then Clifford, who whenever he comes up, which I don't think it's next year, unless he is amazing in the minors, to be able to provide that stuff. Patrick saying offer Pete 5 for 120 and thinks he would sign that. I don't know. I just don't know where they are, as in far apart, as John Heyman says, when it comes to the contract. David Smith completely disagrees with how the Mets are treating Alonso. Seems like they don't want him back. Crazy unless they plan on signing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. next year. I think it's just a waiting game. It's a waiting game. It's a numbers game. It's a money game. As well as Scott Boras has done this year, a lot of teams are not falling for these big contracts. They just aren't. There's too many guys that are now analytical, trying to find value deals. That's why you've seen all these other first basemen being signed and traded for. If they can give up less, there's not a lot of teams that are in our Pete right now. So the Mets are playing the leverage game. Hella this, hella that, saying he hopes that his Giants sign Pete Alonso, which would be very interesting. We've been talking about the Giants being the other suitor most of this show so far. So it's definitely a possibility. You may get what you want. Hella this, hella that. Armand coming with a contract offer. Mets should offer 4 years, $112 million with opt-outs after year 1 and year 2. That is $28 million AAV and makes him the highest paid first baseman. That's a deal I can get down with. It's definitely a deal I can get down with if he's willing to do it. You got him at 4 years. I got him at 5 years. Obviously, there's going to be opt-outs. We definitely have to know that there are going to be opt-outs in there. Patty talking about Alex Bregman should ask at $200 million. I'm pretty sure he is. I'm pretty sure he wanted over $200 million. And also his position at third base, he is the primary third base option that's out there with the highest WAR. If you like wins above replacement, he's just the highest guy out there. Doesn't mean he's going to get it. And who knows, since both Bregman and Alonso are under Scott Boras, could the Mets be trying to work out two things at once? Usually doesn't happen. But that has to be a scenario that goes through your head as well. Adele asking, I would not trade for Vladdy, but I will get him next year in free agency. Also, there are thoughts he can play at third base. Any thoughts to that? I don't know too much about Vladdy playing third base. And again, would you move? And here I'm going to ask you a question here. Would you move Mark Vientos to first to have Vladdy play third when he's played most of his career at first base? I think he started out as a third baseman. If I am mistaken, please let me know. But I think he started out as a third baseman, then moved to first. And then you're going to have him move back to third to now put Mark Vientos at first, who's been playing third. The Mets always preach run prevention. So I want whatever is the best possible outcome and the best possible defensive alignment out there that's going to help them win. And if that is Vlad at third, put him at third. If it's Vlad at first, put him at first. I just don't know if swapping them is the right move. But obviously, I'm not a defensive coach on the team, so they know better. David Stearns knows best, right? What the alignment should be. Cindy McGrath talking about the Giants. The Giants were in on Burns. That's another team. Like, the Giants have been in on a lot of free agents. They haven't been able to land them. So they probably could give, like Cindy says, Pete the money that he wants. David Smith's offer for Pete would be $210 for 7 years. If that what he would take, he is worth it, and 30 years old is not old. So that would put him at 37 years old. David, is there any opt-outs that you're putting in there for Pete? That's a question that I would ask you if you're willing to do that deal. Patrick, good point here. Can't rely on Vlad signing with the Mets next year. Need to buy for now, not a playoff team at this point. And we're going to get into that. We're definitely going to get into, if this Mets team, as currently constructed, is a playoff team or not. I know they got Juan Soto and all. And I know they brought back Sean Manaea. But I think that Juan Soto makes the Mets win a few more games without Pete Alonso. But now you're not really replacing Pete Alonso's production. And with the pitching, I always said that, Manaea wasn't enough, right? It was Manaea and another pitcher that had to come in here, not necessarily Roki Sasaki either. But we'll get into that shortly. A lot of people don't think Vladdy is getting traded this offseason, as Armand puts it. Yeah, I don't think so either. I think he's going to hit free agency. Even if he does get traded midseason, I think he's going to hit free agency. Just finishing up the chat here, trying to catch up. Carson, my guy from Mets Weekly, Pete Alonso is also not Juan Soto. Boris and Alonso believe he's better than he is. Any Mets fan deep down knows that 7-158 was the best he was ever going to get at that moment or now. I think that, that is definitely the best. That he's not going to get higher than that. I know that David Smith had him at 210 7 years. I mean, if he wasn't even willing to take 7-158, the Mets aren't going to offer him that. Cindy McGrath saying nothing wrong with gambling on yourself, but it worked against him, and now he's being stubborn. It did. It did work against Pete. But like you said, there's nothing wrong with being a gambler there. Marcos Figueroa saying, don't count out the Angels. Artie Moreno is always good to do something stupid. They have money. I assume that they are looking for a first baseman, and don't put it past the Angels for him to get that type of money. D saying the Giants have Wilmer Flores at first base, but, Pete Alonso would be a significant upgrade. And then one of these guys, I would assume that, Wilmer Flores would be a DH then at that point. Paranormal in the Funhouse saying, Yankees fan here, baseball fan in general. Any moves today in the baseball world and what's happening with Pete Alonso? Happy holidays. We're still holding out and waiting. It's a waiting game. We're waiting just as much as David Stearns is waiting on this. So we'll definitely see what happens moving forward. I just don't know. Rosie K saying Cohen and Boris have a really good relationship. Yeah, way better than what we saw with the Wilpons or the Coupons or whatever you want to call them at this point in time. So it's definitely a whole lot better. Guys, appreciate you all in the comments. I know that it's a little harder for me trying to get through all the comments solo because trying to talk and get you guys. I don't know how a lot of people do this, especially without a producer here. But a Pizza Sports Guy, good friend on X here, saying one of Alonso and Bregman feels like a must. Absolutely. The Mets cannot come away with not either one of them. They need to have at least one of these guys on the team. They have to. And like I said earlier, to me, Vientos at first, Beatty Mauricio at third is a no-no. That just doesn't work. Yeah, it's a fallback option, obviously. But man, that just doesn't work for me. Not after the moves that a lot of these teams have been making. And you don't sell Juan Soto on coming here, having him know that Mark Vientos is going to play first, and third base is going to be held by Mauricio, who coming back from an injury, a significant injury, and Brett Beatty, who has underperformed every opportunity he has been given. So, yeah, the Mets are going to have to sign at least one of them. Or maybe they go the outfield route. And that'll be the next topic here because the Mets offered Teoscar Hernandez a deal, according to Tim Healy of Newsday. It was a 2-year deal. He eventually ended up signing with the Los Angeles Dodgers, 3 years, $66 million, with a club option for a fourth year, $22 million AAV. According to Will Salmon of The Athletic, the Mets offered him similar AAV over the 2 years with no deferrals. And the Mets had viewed him as the best option available on a short-term deal when it comes to outfielders and DH. Last season, 272 batting average, 33 homers, 99 RBIs, and an 840 OPS for Teoscar Hernandez. Obviously, World Series champion. So very interesting that the Mets offered this while still on the hunt for a first baseman, while still talking to Alex Bregman. And here the Mets are keeping everything under wraps. No one knew that they were in on Teoscar Hernandez, especially after getting Juan Soto and trading for Jose Siri. We thought the outfield alignment was going to be Pete Alonso and Jose Siri, Tyler and Taylor in center field, and Juan Soto in right field. Did anyone think we were going to go after Teoscar Hernandez? Carlos Ramos saying, and I believe that even the Teoscar Hernandez deal works against Pete. When even Teoscar got a short-term deal and for such a low amount, then Pete Alonso cannot accept to get 30 mil nor anything long-term. And it's quite possible. This is where the leverage plays in that I talked about, right? The leverage in the Mets' hands because they offered Hernandez this deal. Bregman is still available that they're interested in. All the other first basemen are now pretty much gone, the top ones. And Pete may be on an island of his own. No question, I want Pete Alonso back. But it had me thinking last week. This was before this Teoscar Hernandez news came out. With all the talks about Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman and how Pete's a sports guy put it, the Mets need to sign one or the other. I was thinking to myself, what happens if they sign neither? Would the move be to bring in one of the top outfielders that are left? Teoscar Hernandez? I was thinking more of Anthony Santander. Last season, 235 batting average, had 44 homers, 102 RBIs, and 814 OPS. Very versatile player, right? 90 games in left field, 24 in center field, 514 in right field, but obviously he'd be moving for Juan Soto. He's played 13 games at first base. So if they need him in a pinch, he could probably play first base. He's DH'd 134 games, so he could be a DH. So he's got some versatility. My question is the same question I have for Pete Alonso. Why is his market so quiet right now? And more than Pete Alonso's is. Have we heard anything about Anthony Santander? I haven't. You could have thought that after the Mets signed Juan Soto, that Anthony Santander would have went like that. Armand saying reports are Santander is looking for a 5-year deal. Would you, as the Mets, offer him a 5-year deal? I don't know if Peter is here saying the Giants are in on Santander as well. I just don't know. But he is an option. Carlos Rim was saying he would give Santander a 5-year deal. Another guy that I was thinking about, and this was brought up in a tweet the other day, yesterday. I was tweeting or posting, whatever you want to call it, on X with a guy, JB, and he mentioned Jurickson Profar. Now, hear me out for a second. And I talked about this with John Sapanero when he was on when he was on the Subway to Shea podcast. You know him from Till Mets Do His Part with my guy Matt Ibanez. Jurickson Profar is only 31 years old. He'll be 32 at some point next year, in early of next year. A 2.7 WAR, second best among left fielders. 280 batting average, 24 homers, 85 RBIs, and an 839 OPS. Better OPS than Anthony Santander. Better batting average than Santander. Performed in the postseason. And I'm sure the Mets can get him on a shorter term type deal. And if you get Profar, you keep him in left field. You move Brandon Nimmo to center and quite possibly give him some days off to play DH. Days off from, playing on the field. And possibly putting him in center field or making him the DH. And then you got Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor out there. Would be wise to move Nimmo back to center field, considering the plantar fasciitis issue that he's had. He did get some time at DH last season, especially dealing with the injuries. What do you do with guys like Marte, Siri, and Taylor if they make one of these type of moves? Is Jesse Winker still in play? These are so many questions. So many questions for the Mets here and options to make moves here. Because obviously, they're not going to be keeping, if they make a move for an outfielder, they're not going to be keeping Marte, Siri, and Taylor. One of them's going to be traded. It's not going to be Siri because he's under control. Taylor is a better defender, and I'm pretty sure they would want to keep him. So you'd have to think that Starling Marte, who there's been talks, I talked about with Pat Ragazzo of Sports Illustrated. There is talks about trading Starling Marte for relief pitching. Would they be able to pull that off? Armand agrees. Most likely Marte would be the one to go. I agree. I totally agree. Brad Fear now saying no to Profar. He only plays well in San Diego. He didn't play well in Colorado. So why do you think he can play in New York? I mean, the last couple of years he's played well. So I'm going off of his last couple of years, his offensive production, the last couple of seasons. I'm not going as far back. When did he play in Colorado? Because I'm not going to act like I know, his stats and when he played in Colorado. Was that most recently? Because I haven't, there's not too much to watch out there in Colorado when it comes to their team. But if that's most recently, I mean, I provided you with the stats here for Profar last season. So I'm just going based off of his play last season, having a pretty good year, kind of comparable to Anthony Santander when it comes to getting on base and when it comes to average. Santander has more power and more RBIs, which you like. So we'll see how the Mets play this out. And if it's a possibility. Now, a lot of people asking, if this is enough, right? I see it in the chat here. D, Soto might be enough. Mets have the young talent. A lot of people asking if this is comparable to the Dodgers lineup. As a Cage is asking, compare the Mets pitching and lineup to the Dodgers. It's not really comparable at this moment in time, right? The Cage, because, first off, the offseason is not over for the Mets. This team is not complete at the moment in time. But if you're asking me at this current moment, if the Mets line up with the Dodgers rotation, bullpen, and lineup, the answer is no. I'm not going to be a homer for, everything that the Mets have done. I'm happy that they got Juan Soto and brought back Sean Manaea. But it's not like the Mets are the best team in baseball just because they landed Juan Soto. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with this team. Which leads me to my next point. Sean Manaea signing, being official. What's next? The rotation, to me, is still not set. Could still use another starting pitcher right now. Even when the Mets were thinking about Manaea, I said Manaea and someone else. People are starting to go off the board. We saw Corbin Burns sign with the Arizona Diamondbacks. John Heyman said it was 6 years, $210 million for $35 million AAV. So Corbin Burns, as much as I would have liked him to be on the Mets and the link to David Stearns from their time in Milwaukee, him coming to the Mets was, a pipe dream for a lot of us. Short-term deal, maybe. But the guy lives in Arizona. It just makes sense. It's a way for him to get back to the West Coast. And that's pretty much what he wanted. What are the Mets doing while all this is going on? I think they are waiting till January 15th to see what happens with Roki Sasaki. Do the Mets have a big chance to land a guy like Roki Sasaki? I will say this. I think they are one of the top 5 teams to be in the running for him. Eventually, I think he ends up in San Diego to play with his buddy Hugh Darvish. But you still got to be on him. You just want to have him in the system for the deal that he's going to be offered, a minor league deal. You want that. The Mets can get that. That would be fantastic. But I do think that he ends up going to San Diego. And even with Roki Sasaki, the rotation still needs help, right? You have Kodai Senga and Roki Sasaki, who probably are going to need 6 days to recover, right? They're going to need the 6-man rotation. The growing pains that it's going to take with Roki Sasaki. The coming back from injury that Kodai Senga is dealing with. You have Frankie Montas, who they're trying to reclimate into Sean Manaea and Luis Severino. You got the project that is Clay Holmes going from being a reliever to now being a starter again. David Peterson, can he be a consistent player? A consistent pitcher? He's not shown that his career. Same thing with Tyler McGill. Griffin Canning, he can give you the innings, but is he going to give you the quality that is needed? He's probably more of a swingman and a spot starter. A lot of questions abound when it comes to the rotation. And you look at some of the top rotations in the National League, the Dodgers, San Diego, Arizona, Atlanta, Philly. You could throw in Milwaukee in there. Obviously, the Dodgers the best at the moment in time with Yamamoto, Glasnow, Snell, Ohtani, and Tony Gonsolin. San Diego has Dylan Cease, Michael King, Yu Darvish, Randy Vasquez, and Matt Waldron in the back. Arizona, now with Corbin Burns, Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, Eduardo Rodriguez, Brandon Pfaadt, Jordan Montgomery. Atlanta has Chris Sale if he could stay healthy. Ronaldo Lopez, who was a converted reliever. Spencer Schwellenbach, who killed the Mets all season long. Grant Holmes and Ian Anderson. Philly, I mean, look at Philly. Zach Wheeler, Christopher Sanchez, Aaron Nola, Ranger Suarez, Jesus Luzardo. And Milwaukee has Peralta, Brandon Woodruff, Aaron Savale, Tobias Myers, Nestor Cortez now as their 5th starter. The Mets have a lot of work to do. And who knows, maybe Brandon Sproat comes up this year. Maybe a Blade Tidwell makes his debut. As I said earlier, the Mets need to step up here. There's a lot of work. They could add another starter, whether it's a Flaherty in free agency or trade for Luis Castillo or even a Dylan Cease. If they're not going to do that, they need to bulk up the offense, right? Pete Alonso, we talked about. Alex Bregman. Heck, sign both. And put Mark Vientos at DH. Or how about working on the bullpen? I know there's these little depth signings and these little tryout signings that the Mets are doing, but why not re-sign Ryan Stanek? I know he didn't have the great first impression during the season, but he was solid in the playoffs. 4-0, 2.89 ERA. Him and Edwin Diaz were the best out of the bullpen, and you can even argue that Stanek was a little bit better than Edwin Diaz was. He was one of the only reliable relievers the Mets had this postseason. Sign Tanner Scott. Need a lefty and someone who can spell Edwin Diaz. Last season, he was 9-6 with a 1.75 ERA, and he had 22 saves. Now, obviously, he's probably going to go for closer type money, and he'll want to be a closer. But there's no reason for the Mets not to be, picking up the phone and calling for Tanner Scott. In 6 playoff games, he has a 0 ERA. So there are ways for this team to get better that don't have to involve them adding another starter, although it would be nice. That's for sure. It would be dang nice if they did. Now, I just wanted to say that I appreciate every single one of you right now in the chat. 275 people in the room with me on this Sunday morning. A little Mets in the morning for you. Gonna wrap up this show with the chat and see what you got for me. D is against Tanner Scott. He doesn't like his stuff. My whole thought process in Tanner Scott is the Mets do need, well, first off, they need a setup man, right? I thought that was going to be Clay Holmes when they signed him, but they want him to be a starter. I want Edwin Diaz to not have to come in the 6th inning for 1 out and then rely on the rest of the bullpen to try to get the rest of the outs here. The Mets need another solid reliever to help out in the bullpen. And maybe it comes from within at some point. But man, on paper, I would like another solid reliever. That's for sure. Eat Your Greens production saying sign Scott and Paul Sewald. Man, I don't know if I could go back to the Paul Sewald, man. I know he's had a good career once he left the Mets, but he really hated being here, I think. I think the Mets messed with him so much, and he did not do himself any favors that I think that I know it's a new era of Mets baseball and a new leadership, but I just don't think that he is going to come here and wants to be here. I'm pretty sure he wants to close too as well. I don't know if how he feels about that. Pastor Steve Bovey saying, has anyone looked to Minnesota? They are financially strapped and are looking to unload Correa. 4 years, 128 left on the contract. I don't know if I want to go back to Correa with that bulky ankle that he has. I know he's a great offensive talent, but man, to have, you can use that money better elsewhere with healthier players. Ricardo saying they have not addressed the bullpen at all this offseason, and that was the main cause why the Dodgers won the series. Yeah, the Dodgers won the series because they have a great bullpen, throwing 2 bullpen games at us, although we won one of them. But the bullpen was solid all series long and all postseason long. If the Mets want to be the East Coast Dodgers, you better start building a bullpen. Ricardo also mentioning Kirby Yates. I've heard a lot of that as well. Could the Mets be in on a guy like Kirby Yates? MCW thinks that Clay Holmes is going to end up in the bullpen. So does Carlos Ramos, and it might be possible. Peter trying to give me PTSD here and say, get Aaron Heilman. I know he's joking around, but man, I haven't heard that name in years. I don't want to keep it that way. But thank you for the comment, Peter. I appreciate you. D saying sign Bregman and Alonso and Sasaki, and then we're good. Yes, D. Sasaki is buddies with Darvish, is why I think he'll be ending up in San Diego. Henry Del Valle says the Mets didn't guarantee Holmes to be a starter. They will give him a chance. Yes, they will give him a chance to start here. And if he doesn't do well, then maybe he becomes the setup man. But I still think you can help yourself out by, one, getting a reliever if that's a setup guy, as well as a lefty. That's why I want Tanner Scott. I mean, the Mets have not had a decent lefty since Aaron Loop. I know Jeff Cohen wants this guy so badly. He wants Pablo Lopez from Minnesota. I don't know what he's going to cost. If he'd cost more than a guy like Garrett Crochet, and if the Mets are willing to give up guys, I'm pretty sure that the starting point is Jet Williams, Brandon Sprout. Eat Your Greed saying trade away Jeff McNeil, Beatty, and Marte. I think eventually all 3 of these guys will be gone at some point, whether this year or next year. Stan from West Point saying Holmes will be a great starter and one of the best in National League. Trust the plan and the lab. We've seen good comps of it, right? Michael King, Seth Lugo, who was in the Mets. I mean, if they're doing this with him, I don't know why they didn't do it with Seth Lugo, who we all thought should have been a starter to begin with. Ronaldo Lopez as well. Brad Fear now saying, what about David Robertson? Another year older, but he pitched well as a Met. He pitches well in New York. I'd be willing to give David Robertson an opportunity. Couple people mentioning Brooks Raley in here, and he is hurt. He won't be pitching at the beginning of the season at all. I think he's going to miss at least half of a season. All right, a few more comments in here. A lot of you guys have been hitting it up. I appreciate every single one of you for doing that. If I don't mention your comment, please forgive me. I'm trying the best that I can under these circumstances that I'm running solo here. Sean Rock 57 says Stearns was brought in because of his sustained success in Milwaukee. He's trying to build a sustainable playoff team. You need both vets and youth to offset the veteran money. That's definitely probably the route that he's going with. There's no denying that. And he got the team to the playoffs, whether you want to consider it luck or not. The team did make it to the playoffs, and now he's trying to build a consistent winner. Let's see if he actually does it. Duran Rivera saying, "Rest in peace, Dad, to my father, Adolfo. You shall be missed. Love from your family heart. So sorry for your loss. Duran, my thoughts and prayers are with you, my friend. Always appreciate you being a part of here and being on here." All right, guys, I am going to pretty much wrap it up here. Actually, let me get this one more comment in here from Paul Flans. Wouldn't Jose Butto be the ideal six-starter bullpen swingman? Yes, right? But as we saw in the postseason, right? When you're that kind of swingman type pitcher coming out of the bullpen, right? That long reliever type, you need multiple days off. And Jose Butto proved that during the postseason. Pitched very well game 2, right? Then they tried coming right back with him the next day. And ever since that, he struggled the rest of the postseason. Why? He did not have the proper rest needed, which was like 3 or 4 days he needed to feel good again. And that's why I think they added a guy like Griffin Canning in here to lighten that load. Have multiple guys that could be swingmen. Maybe that's a way to handle the bullpen. The Mets just need to help Griffin Canning find himself with that 5.19 ERA that he had. I do love Jose Butto. I was a huge proponent of him last season and what he did for the Mets down the stretch, him and Daniel Nunez. So to have them back in the bullpen next season is only going to help. But I still would like to see the Mets bring in some bullpen help. MCW saying, I think we won't see any more signings until late January. I think probably after this whole ordeal with Roki Sasaki is done. And I know it's not really doing much to the major league roster because it would be on a minor league deal. But I think the Mets, as well as other teams, want to see where they stand when it comes to, adding other pieces to this team. Like I said, to me, even adding Roki Sasaki, I still would like to see another starting pitcher out there. But who knows? Who knows how they're going to handle this? And as Stan from Westport puts it, the lab and Jeremy Hefner and his staff are highly regarded in MLB circles. I'm not the biggest Jeremy Hefner fan, but Hefner is like beloved in baseball for the work that he's done. And that's why we're getting the Frankie Montazes of the world. We're getting Griffin Canning. Did wonders on Sean Manaea and Kodai Senga. So let's see if he can continue. But I don't want to every year do this cycle where we try to fix players. Maybe one pitcher, but to have 2 or 3 of those type of players, I think you're really, pushing it when it comes to that. Eat your greens. Production saying AJ Minter, Scott, and one other guy will shore up this bullpen. Get it done. Get it done. All right, guys. I just want to say once again, I appreciate every one of you for tuning in. 283 people. Before I wrap up the show, quick note here, latest news and happenings with this team. I don't know if you guys got to check it out, but on Friday, I joined Rob Linehan from Talking Mets with Rob, invited me on the show. Talked a lot of the same topics here, but check out the show. Went on for about an hour and a half. Great time with him and chatting it up about the Mets. If you missed it, go on his YouTube page, Talking Mets with Rob, to check it out. But that's pretty much going to wrap it up here for Subway to Shea, most likely for the year, right? Unless there's some type of signing in the next couple of days, this is probably the last show of 2024. So what I want to do right now, I want to wish you a happy new year to every one of you guys in the chat, to all of Mets Nation. Hope you get everything you want into the coming year. Hopefully the Mets make some more moves and become a more legitimate contender on a consistent basis. And that this Mets team wins a World Series at some point in the next couple of years. A lot of work needs to be done, but the Mets can do it. The Mets got to get done. Only one team wins the World Series every year. The Mets just got to get themselves into the postseason every year to get that opportunity. And it's about that time, because we haven't seen a consistent winner since that 84-90 run for the New York Mets. So let's see it get done. You can follow the Subway to Shea podcast on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me personally at Ant Rivera 86. If you enjoyed this content today, please like the video. Please subscribe to Subway to Shea on YouTube. We're closing in on 800 subscribers. So share with your fellow Met fans. Share with your family and friends. And help this guy out here. If you like to listen to the audio version, you can do that by subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Turn on those notifications. Once you do that, automatically lets you know when the episodes are up. And this episode will most likely be up at some point later tonight on Apple and Spotify. But once again, I appreciate every single one of you for being a part of this conversation. You know, I always worry when I do these solo if I'm going to make it past 20, 25 minutes. But look at us. Like Paul Rudd said, look at us. Past an hour here. And that's a lot of thanks due to you guys in the chat for hanging out, putting in your comments, putting in your questions, having a little bit of fun. So that's what it's all about. The chat's about fun. That's what this podcast is about. Having a little bit of fun, enjoying the Mets talk. So once again, Happy New Year, everybody. And let's go into 2025 on a positive note, hoping that our New York Mets will win a World Series in 2025. They got a lot of work to do, and it still can get done. But let's hope that they do get it done. For Anthony Rivera, this has been the Subway to Shea podcast. And always remember, let's go Mets.